The servant's door groaned on its leather hinges, and Yash Doomhammer pressed her spine flat against the canvas wall of the feast tent, listening to her own heartbeat pound louder than the drums outside. Beyond the flap, torchlight painted the war camp gold, and somewhere among the roasting spits and the low chant of the clan's binding song, Goreth Doomhammer was waiting for his bride. She was not going to give him one. She had shed the ceremonial furs already, letting the silver-threaded veil slither off her shoulders and pool in the mud like a dead thing, because underneath she wore what she always wore when she meant to move fast and fight hard. Her fitted warrior leathers, dark and oiled, laced tight over a figure built for both war and want, iron studs winking along the seams of her bodice, vambraces strapped snug to her forearms, a knife she was not supposed to have hidden in the boot Goreth's men had not thought to search. Betrothal cuffs of soft bronze chain still dangled from her wrists, more decoration than restraint, and she tore them free with her teeth as she ran. Behind her, a guard's voice rose in confusion, calling her name, calling for others. She did not look back. She cut past the cook fires, past crates of grain and barrels of mead meant for a wedding feast that would never happen, and out through the gap in the camp's log palisade where the servants hauled slop and ash after dark, where no warrior of standing would ever think to look for a warlord's promised bride. The night air hit her like cold water. Somewhere ahead, past the picket line of horses and the low shed with its glowing forge fire, was the one person in this camp, or the human town beyond it, who had never once looked at her like. She was a prize to be won or a debt to be paid. She ran for him. Arthur Monroe heard the crash of the paddock gate before he saw her, and his hand went instinctively to the hammer resting against his anvil, though he set it down again the moment torchlight caught green skin and dark braids and eyes the color of amber caught in firelight. She came through the gate at a dead sprint, chest heaving, leather laces half undone at her collar, and for one wild heartbeat Arthur thought the camp was under attack. Yash. Her name came out of him rough, urgent, the only sound he could manage. What happened? They mean to bind me to him tonight, she said, and her voice, usually so steady, so commanding, cracked down the middle like ice under a boot heel. In front of the whole clan, before the fire burns low, I will not stand there and let that murdering worm put his hand over mine and call it law. Shouts rose from the direction of the great tent, torches bobbing between the hide dwellings like fireflies gone to war. Arthur's mind, usually slow and careful the way a good gamekeeper's mind had to be, worked fast now. He grabbed the horse blanket off the rail, threw it over her shoulders to hide the gleam of her leathers, and pulled her down behind the forge's stone wall just as the first pair of guards came pounding past the paddock, spears low, eyes wild with the particular panic of men who had lost something precious and would answer for it with their own hides. "This way," he whispered, and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her. Her fingers were warm despite the cold, calloused from a blade's grip, strong enough to break his wrist if she wished it, and she did not let go. They ran together into the dark tree line at the camp's edge, the shouting fading behind them into the rustle of leaves and the drumbeat of two hearts that had, without either of them quite admitting it until this very night, already decided whose door they would run to when the world caught fire. 2 months before that night, Arthur Monroe had not known Yash Doomhammer's name at all. He had known only that Lord Reginald Ashworth, who owned the forest that fed and warmed the town of Fenmore Crossing, had signed a fragile treaty with the Orc clan camped at Blackridge, 5 years after a war that had left both sides too bled to fight another one. Part of that treaty required a farrier, since the clan's warhorses needed shoeing same as any humans, and Fenmore Crossing's blacksmith was too old and too frightened to make the ride. So the duty fell, as most unpleasant and dangerous duties in Arthur's life tended to fall, on him. He was gamekeeper first, farrier second, though the townsfolk of Fenmore Crossing rarely remembered the first part unless a poacher needed catching. He walked Lord Ashworth's forest 3 days out of every 7, counting deer and marking traps, and turning a blind eye more often than his lord would have liked. When a widow's boy snared a rabbit out of season, Arthur wrote it down as taken by foxes. When a hungry orc hunting party strayed a half-mile past the treaty line chasing a wounded stag, he let them finish the chase before he ever found the tracks, and by then the meat was already smoking over their fires. He was not proud of the lying. He was prouder of the empty bellies it filled. It was on his third visit to Blackridge Camp, hauling his farrier's kit through the mud on a borrowed mule, that he first saw her. She stood beside a black warhorse the size of a small barn, a stallion called Scarn who had, according to the grumbling orc handler, thrown 3 farriers into the mud already that morning. Yash Doomhammer wore her fitted leathers the color of old rust, laced snug from collar to hip, sleeves cut short to bare strong forearms marked with old scars. She wore the way other women wore jewelry, and a long knife strapped to her thigh that she touched, Arthur noticed, the way some people touched a lucky coin. She was tall even among her own kind, built with a warrior's easy strength, and when she turned those amber eyes on him, appraising him the way a hawk appraises something that might be prey or might simply be beneath its notice, something in Arthur's chest turned over like a plow breaking new ground. "You're small for a farrier," she said, not unkindly, simply stating a fact the way she seemed to state most things. "I'm big enough for the job," Arthur answered, setting down his kit before the horse, who rolled one dark eye at him and stamped a hoof the size of a dinner plate. "He has thrown 3 men today. Then he's due for a 4th who doesn't get thrown." Something flickered across her face that might have been amusement, might have been the first flicker of interest, though Arthur would not know to call it that for weeks yet. He knelt at Scarn's foreleg, ran his palm slow down the horse's tendon the way his own father had taught him a lifetime ago, murmured low words no one else needed to hear, and lifted the hoof without so much as a flinch from the great animal. Behind him he heard Yash's knife hiss half free of its sheath, testing him, he understood later, the same way she tested every stranger who came near something she loved. He did not flinch either. He simply kept working, and after a long moment the knife slid home again. "You are not afraid of me," she said. It was not quite a question. "I'm plenty afraid," Arthur admitted, driving the first nail with 3 clean strikes. Man would be a fool not to be, standing this close to a knife and a stallion both, but being afraid and running are 2 different things, far as I've ever seen. Yash Doomhammer studied him a long moment, arms crossed over a chest that made it hard for Arthur to keep his eyes where they belonged, and then she laughed, a short surprised bark of a sound that seemed to startle her as much as it did him. "You are an odd little man, farrier." "Arthur," he said. "Arthur Monroe." "Arthur Monroe," she repeated, testing the shape of it in her mouth like she was deciding whether she liked the taste. "I am Yash Doomhammer." Neither of them knew yet how much weight that second name would come to carry. Over the following weeks, Arthur's visits to Blackridge Camp became the brightest part of a life that had, until then, been built mostly of quiet forest paths and lonelier evenings than he liked to admit. He learned the camp's rhythms, the smoke of the cook fires at dawn, the ring of practice swords in the yard where young orcs trained under scarred veterans, the low murmur of the elders' council tent where clan business was settled with more shouting than a human court would tolerate. He learned, too, that Yash Doomhammer was no ordinary warrior. She was the daughter of Kagra Doomhammer, the old warlord, a woman whose blood alone made her important to men who otherwise cared nothing for her opinion, and that fact sat on her like a saddle sore, chafing worse every day. "My father built this clan from 3 broken tribes," she told him once, sitting on an overturned crate near his forge while he worked a stubborn shoe loose from a mare's hoof. "He did not do it with marriages and treaties written by frightened lords. He did it with his axe and his word, and both were worth more than gold." "Sounds like a good man," Arthur said. "He was the only good thing in this camp some days," Yash said, and something in her voice made Arthur look up from his work. "He has been dead 6 weeks. A fever, they say. He was strong as a bear and never sick a day I knew him, and then he ate supper with his nephew and did not wake the next morning. Arthur set down his rasp slowly. You don't believe it was a fever? I believe Goreth wanted to be warlord and my father was standing in the way of it, Yash said, low and flat. The words of someone who had turned this thought over so many times in the dark that it had worn smooth as a river stone. And now Goreth cannot simply seize the title, because the clan's law says the blood of Yash Doomhammer must bless whoever leads after him. So he means to marry that blood. He means to marry me. The betrothal was announced 3 nights later. At a bonfire so large, it turned the whole camp the color of embers, with every warrior and elder and thrall gathered in a wide ring to watch Goreth Doomhammer stride to the center, and take Yash's unwilling hand and lift it high for the clan to see, proclaiming the union that would, by law and blood, make him warlord in truth as well as name. Arthur stood near the horse lines at the edge of that crowd, shooing a gelding by lantern light because Lord Ashworth's schedule did not pause for another man's wedding announcement, and he watched Yash's face across that great fire-lit distance and felt something in his own chest crack clean through. She did not look at Goreth. She looked at Arthur once, just once, across all those heads and torches, and in that single look he read something he had no right to hope for and could not stop hoping for anyway. That night, long after the bonfire had burned to coals and the camp had gone quiet with drink and celebration, Yash came to his forge in the dark, moving like a shadow between the tents, and Arthur was waiting because some part of him had known she would come. I cannot marry him, she said, before he had even set down his tools. I would rather put my own knife through my heart than let that man's hand rest on mine as husband. Yash, do not tell me it will be well. Do not tell me to be patient and let the elders sort it out, because the elders are frightened of him, and frightened old men do not sort out anything. Her voice shook, not with weakness but with a fury too large for words, and Arthur understood, watching her, that this was a woman who had never once in her life allowed herself to be afraid in front of another living soul, and she was afraid now, and she had chosen to be afraid in front of him. I'm not going to tell you any of that, Arthur said quietly. He set down the rasp. He crossed the small space between them, close enough to feel the heat coming off her skin, close enough that she could have broken his arm without trying. I'm going to tell you that you're not alone in this. Whatever you decide to do about him, you don't have to decide it by yourself. Yash looked at him for a long, searching moment, amber eyes bright in the low firelight, and then she closed the last of the distance between them and kissed him. It was not gentle. It was hungry and fierce and a little desperate, the kiss of someone who had spent weeks telling herself this was foolish and had finally stopped listening to her own good sense. And Arthur met it with everything he had, one hand rising to cup her jaw, the other finding the small of her back where the leather laces gave way to warm skin. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Yash pressed her forehead to his and laughed, low and unsteady. You are still an odd little man, Arthur Monroe. You already said that once. I meant it more the second time. Word of that closeness did not stay secret long. Lord Ashworth summoned Arthur to the manor house within the week, his study smelling of pipe smoke and old parchment, and did not bother with pleasantries. I hear you've grown friendly with the orc girl, Ashworth said, not looking up from the ledger he was pretending to study. The warlord's bride. I do my job, my lord, shoeing horses. Do not lie to me in my own house, Monroe. Ashworth finally looked up, and his eyes were hard as flint. That treaty is the only reason this town still stands where 5 years ago it stood in ashes. I have my own arrangements with Goreth, arrangements that depend on that marriage going forward smoothly and without complication. You are a complication, Monroe. Do you understand me? I understand you're asking me to look the other way while a woman is forced to marry a man who murdered her father, Arthur said, and he watched Ashworth's face go still and careful in a way that told him more than any confession could have. You understand nothing of clan politics, Ashworth said, but he did not deny it, and that silence sat in Arthur's chest like a stone all the way home. In the town square that same week, 3 men from the tavern blocked Arthur's path as he walked toward the smithy, faces flushed with drink and old grudges. "Here you've taken a liking to green skin, Monroe," one of them sneered. "Didn't figure you for that kind of low." Arthur did not raise his voice, though his hands curled into fists at his sides. "I'd rather keep company with someone honest than drink with men who have got nothing better to do than sneer at their neighbors. She's not your neighbor. She's a beast wearing a woman's shape." "Say that again and you'll be picking your teeth up off these cobbles," Arthur said, and something in his tone, quiet and utterly certain, made even drunk men take half a step back. He did not wait for a reply. He walked on, jaw tight, heart hammering, and did not look back to see whether they followed. He did not tell Yash about that encounter. He told her about Ashworth's threat instead, sitting with her in the shadow of the paddock fence 2 nights later, and she took his hand in both of hers, calloused fingers wrapping around his like she meant to weld them together by will alone. "Your lord is a coward who trades in other people's suffering for his own comfort," she said. "You are not made of the same stuff, Arthur Monroe. I saw that the first day when you were not afraid of my knife." "I was plenty afraid," he reminded her, and she smiled, and for a while the danger circling both their lives felt very far away. It did not stay far away long. The wedding date was set, moved forward at Gorath's insistence, and Yash Doomhammer found herself standing 3 nights later in ceremonial furs and beaded chains, being led toward the great feast tent by women of the clan who would not meet her eyes, because they knew, as everyone knew, that this was no true celebration. That was the night she slipped through the servant's door. They ran until the shouting behind them faded into the ordinary night sounds of the forest, until Yash's breathing slowed and Arthur's legs ached from a pace he was not built to keep for long. They stopped at last in a hollow beneath an old fallen oak, deep inside the very stretch of forest Arthur had walked and guarded for 6 years, ground he knew better than his own hands. "They will search everywhere," Yash said, still catching her breath, the borrowed horse blanket clutched around her shoulders. "Gorath cannot let this stand. If his claim is not sealed by our binding, the elders may still question it, and he knows it." "Then we don't stay in one place," Arthur said. "I know this forest. Every deer trail, every dry creek bed, every hollow log big enough to hide a man. We'll keep moving until we figure out what comes next." Yash looked at him for a long moment, firelight from 100 torches still flickering somewhere behind the tree line, and something in her face softened into something Arthur had not seen there before, something that looked almost like wonder. "You would risk your lord's anger, your town's anger, your own life, for me." "I already have," Arthur said simply. "Seems foolish to stop now." She laughed, short and surprised and warm, and pulled him close, and for a moment, hidden beneath the fallen oak with the whole furious world hunting them, they simply held on to each other and let that be enough. They moved through the dark for the better part of 2 hours, Arthur leading them along paths no torchlight could easily follow, until they reached an old stone watchtower, roofless and crumbling, that Lord Ashworth's grandfather had built generations ago to watch for raiders who no longer came. Arthur knew every loose stone in its base, knew the hollow beneath the old hearth where a man could hide a bedroll and a bit of dried meat against hard winters on patrol. It was not comfortable. It was, for one night, safe enough. "They will not think to look here," Arthur said, settling a threadbare blanket over the stone floor. "This is my ground. Nobody in Fenmore Crossing walks it but me." Yash sat across from him, knees drawn up, the borrowed blanket still around her shoulders over her leathers, and for a long while neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything neither of them had said yet. "My father used to tell me," she said at last, "that a warrior's worth is not measured by what she is given, but by what she chooses to keep. Land titles, even a husband, none of that means anything if it was handed to you by someone else's hand. He would have hated to see me stand there tonight and let Gorath place a chain on my wrist and call it a blessing." "You didn't let him," Arthur said. "No. Something fierce and proud moved behind her eyes even now, even exhausted and hunted in a crumbling tower in the dark. I did not. "Tell me about your father," Arthur said, and so she did for the better part of an hour. Stories of a warlord who had once wrestled a bear cub away from its angry mother on a dare and kept the scars to prove it, who had taught his daughter to throw a knife before she could properly walk, who had wept, actually wept, the day she killed her first boar alone in the deep woods and came home dragging it by herself. Arthur listened to every word like it was something precious, because it was, and somewhere in the telling of it, Yash Doomhammer, who had not cried once through weeks of grief and fury and fear, finally let the tears come, and Arthur simply held her while she did, saying nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. When she finally quieted, she looked up at him, cheeks still wet in the moonlight leaking through the broken roof, and touched his face with a gentleness that seemed almost foreign to her hands, hands built for blades and reins and hard work. "I have known warriors twice your size who could not stand as steady as you have stood tonight," she said. "I do not know what I did to deserve you finding me, Arthur Monroe, but I am glad of it." "I think I found something worth deserving," Arthur said. What passed between them after that was slow and warm and entirely their own, a quiet unmaking of every wall either of them had built out of fear or duty or the world's ready cruelty. There was no ceremony to it, no clan law or lord's blessing, only two people choosing each other in the dark with nothing left to lose and everything, suddenly, to gain. When dawn finally came gray and soft through the broken tower roof, they lay tangled together in borrowed blankets, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, the world outside felt like something they might face together and win. They could not stay hidden forever, and both of them knew it. By the second day, word had reached even Fenmore Crossing that the Warlord's promised bride had vanished from her own binding right, and that Yash Doomhammer had sent riders out in every direction, offering a bounty of iron and cattle for her safe return, and a considerably darker reward for the farrier said to have helped her run. Lord Ashworth summoned the town's few armed men and rode out himself along the forest road, less concerned with justice than with the treaty he feared collapsing around him. "We cannot simply hide," Yash said, pacing the small confines of the old watchtower on the third morning, her leathers creased from 2 nights sleeping rough, her braids coming loose at the edges. "Even if we run to the mountains, even if we cross into lands neither clan nor crown claims, Yash will still sit as warlord. He will still have murdered my father and profited by it. I cannot spend the rest of my life running from a lie I know the truth of." "Then we don't run," Arthur said. "We prove it. Prove it how?" "My father is buried. There is no body to examine for poison even if any healer in that camp dared to look. There might be another way." Arthur had been turning the thought over since the first night in the tower, chewing on it the way he chewed on a hard problem in the forest, slow and careful. "You said your father ate with Yash the night before he died. Somebody prepared that meal. Somebody poured that wine." Yash's eyes sharpened. "A thrall. There is a woman, Ressa, who has served the warlord's tent for years. If anyone saw something that night, it would be her. But she would never speak against Yash. She would be killed for it. Not if there's someone with more standing than either of us willing to hear her and protect her after," Arthur said. "Is there anyone left in that camp who still holds power and doesn't answer to Yash?" Yash was quiet a long moment, and then her expression shifted, something like hope breaking through the exhaustion. "Borek Ironveen, my father's oldest friend, an elder who has served on the clan council since before I was born. Yash has not dared move against him outright because Borek commands the loyalty of half the warband. If we could reach him, if we could bring him proof, then that's where we go," Arthur said. It was not a short journey nor a safe one. Reaching Borek Ironveen meant slipping back toward Blackridge Camp itself, the very ground crawling with Yash's hunters, and doing it without being seen by either orc trackers or Ashworth's mounted men, who had begun combing the forest roads in earnest. Arthur led them along deer paths and dry stream beds, places no horse could easily follow, using every trick 6 years of gamekeeping had taught him about moving unseen through his own woods. On the second night of that journey, crossing a shallow but swift-running creek in the dark, Arthur's foot slipped on a mossy stone and he went down hard, the current catching at his legs, dragging him toward a stretch of rapids that would have cracked his skull against the rocks below. Yash was in the water after him before he'd even finished shouting, one powerful arm hooking under his shoulders, hauling him bodily against the current with a strength that made the whole ordeal look almost effortless, dragging them both up onto the far bank in a tangle of soaked clothes and gasping breath. "You are going to get yourself killed before Gorath's men ever find us," she said, half laughing, half furious, checking his skull for injury with rough, careful hands. "Good thing I've got you to fish me out," Arthur said, and she kissed him then, hard and sudden, right there on the muddy bank with the creek still roaring past them, because some feelings did not wait politely for better timing. They reached the outskirts of Blackridge Camp on the fourth night, moving low along the tree line until they found the small, isolated tent where Borek Ironveen kept his own council, away from the noise and politics of the central fires. The old orc elder was broad and gray-braided, a battle-axe scar splitting one eyebrow, and when Yash slipped through his tent flap in the dark with a human farrier at her side, he did not shout or reach for a weapon. He simply looked at her for a long, measuring moment and said, "Your father would be proud of the trouble you're causing, girl. Borek, I need your help. I know what you need." The old elder's face darkened. "I have suspected Gorath's hand in Kagra's death since the morning we found him cold and stiff in his own bed. But suspicion is not proof, and I am one old warrior against a nephew who has spent 2 months buying loyalty with promises and fear." "We think Ressa may have seen something the night my father died," Yash said. "If we can reach her, I will bring her to you," Borek said. "Quietly and carefully for both our sakes, but girl, understand this. If we do this and fail, Gorath will not simply banish you a second time. He will kill you both and call it justice under clan law, and no one, not even I, will be able to stop him." "Then we had better not fail," Yash said, and Arthur, standing at her side in the dim lamplight of that tent, felt the truth of that settle into his bones like the weight of a promise he intended to keep. Ressa came before dawn, small and quick and terrified, and it took Borek's steady presence and Yash's own gentle patience to coax the story out of her at last. She had indeed served Kagra Doomhammer's final meal, and she had seen Gorath slip something into the old warlord's wine cup when he thought no one watching, a pale powder he claimed was simply spice. She had said nothing then out of fear, and had carried the guilt of that silence for 6 long weeks. "I still have the cup," she whispered. "I could not bring myself to use it again. It sits at the bottom of the wash barrel behind the warlord's old tent, wrapped in cloth. I do not know if any trace remains, but I could not throw it away either." "Then we have our proof," Borek said grimly. "If the elders will believe an old man, a frightened thrall, and a warrior's daughter over the word of the man who currently commands their fear." "They will believe it," Yash said, "if we bring it before the whole clan in the open, where Gorath cannot simply have us quietly killed in a dark tent." The council fire was called for that very evening, Borek, using what standing remained to him, to demand a full gathering under clan law, on the grounds of a grave accusation against the warlord's blood. Word spread through the camp like grass fire, and by the time the sun sank low and orange over the palisade, nearly the entire clan had gathered in the wide ring around the great fire, warriors and elders and thralls alike, drawn by rumor and dread in equal measure. Gorath arrived flanked by a dozen of his own loyal warriors, his face a mask of practiced calm that did not quite reach his eyes when he saw Yash Doomhammer standing tall and unbowed at Borek's side, Arthur Monroe close beside her, the wrapped cup held carefully in Ressa's trembling hands. "You dare bring a human into our council fire," Gorath said, voice carrying easily over the crowd, and a runaway bride who has shamed her clan and her blood before every warrior here. I should have you both killed where you stand." "You are welcome to try," Yash said, and there was no fear in her voice at all now, only cold and steady fury. "But first, uncle, you will answer for what is wrapped in that cloth." The crowd's murmur rose and fell like wind through dry grass as Ressa's story was told, as the cup was unwrapped for every eye to see, as Borek Ironveen stood and vouched for the thrall's honesty with the full weight of his own long standing in the clan. Goreth's calm cracked slowly, visibly, his face shifting from disdain to fury to something like desperation as the ring of warriors around him began, one by one, to step back, putting distance between themselves and a man they had followed out of fear and were no longer certain deserved it. "Lies," Goreth spat. "A thrall's fantasy, a grieving girl's grasping. I will not stand accused by a coward and a human's pet." "Then answer it the old way," Yash said, and the crowd went utterly silent because every orc present knew what that phrase meant. Trial of blade before the whole clan, as our law allows when words alone cannot settle a matter of blood and honor. "If you are innocent, prove it with your axe against mine." Goreth's eyes flicked to the crowd, to the warriors no longer quite meeting his gaze, and something calculating moved behind his expression, the look of a man realizing he had run out of easier paths. "Gladly," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "I will enjoy silencing you myself, niece." Arthur's stomach dropped at the sheer scale of the man drawing his axe from its harness, broader through the shoulders than Yash, scarred from a dozen real battles, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had never once lost a fight that mattered. He wanted to step between them. He knew with a sick certainty that doing so would only get him killed and change nothing. "Yash," he said, low, urgent, catching her hand once before she stepped into the fire-lit ring. "Come back to me." "I intend to," she said, and there was something in her eyes, fierce and warm and utterly certain, that steadied his racing heart even as she turned away. The duel was fast and brutal, axe against Yash's twin blades, sparks and grunts, and the heavy thud of blows meeting shields and forearms in the flickering firelight, while the whole clan watched in a silence broken only by ragged breathing and the crackle of flames. Goreth was strong, stronger perhaps than Yash in raw power, but she was faster, angrier, fighting not for a title or a claim, but for her father's memory and her own stolen future. And every strike she landed carried the full weight of 6 weeks of grief turned into something sharp enough to cut. It ended when Goreth overextended a heavy swing, off balance for half a heartbeat, and Yash's blade came up under his guard and laid him flat on his back in the dirt. Her second blade pressed to his throat before the crowd had even finished gasping. "Yield," she said, "or die knowing the whole clan watched you fall for the coward and murderer you are." Goreth yielded. There was no honor left in him to do otherwise. The elders stripped him of his claim before the fire had burned another hand's width lower, and clan law, old and unforgiving, saw him bound and cast out beyond the palisade before dawn, stripped of weapons and standing both, left to whatever fate the wilds decided for him. Borek Ironveen, standing now as the clan's senior elder, turned to Yash Doomhammer, blood-spattered and breathing hard and more beautiful in that moment, Arthur thought, than he had words to describe, and asked the question the whole camp had clearly been waiting to hear. "The blood right is yours now, Yash Doomhammer. Will you take your father's place as warlord of this clan?" The crowd held its breath. Arthur, standing at the edge of the firelight, felt his own heart lodge somewhere in his throat because he understood, watching her face, that this was a choice bigger than either of them, one that could pull her into a life he had no place in. Yash looked out over the gathered clan for a long moment, then back at Arthur, and something settled in her expression, calm and certain as bedrock. "I will not," she said, and the crowd's murmur rose in surprise. "Borek Ironveen has led beside my father since before I could walk. He commands the respect of this clan already, earned honestly over decades, not seized in a single night of blood. I name him Warlord in my father's memory if the elders will have him, and I ask only this in return." She turned then fully to face Arthur and reached out her hand. "That the clan honor the bond I intend to make, with a man who ran into danger for me not once but a dozen times over, who never once asked what I could give him in return." The elders conferred briefly, murmuring, and Barak Ironveen, newly named Warlord in all but final ceremony, stepped forward with something almost like a smile breaking through his scarred old face. "Clan law does not forbid a Doomhammer from choosing her own mate," he said. "It only forbids her from being forced into one. Yash Doomhammer, do you claim this human as yours before the whole clan of your own free will?" "I do," Yash said, without a heartbeat's hesitation, and crossed the fire-lit ring to stand before Arthur, taking both his hands in hers. "I claim Arthur Monroe as mine, farrier and gamekeeper, braver than warriors twice his size, the only man I have ever met who was never afraid of the wrong things." Arthur, throat tight, hardly trusting his own voice, managed only, "I claim you right back, Yash Doomhammer, for as long as you'll have me." The clan's roar of approval nearly drowned out the crackle of the great fire. The weeks that followed were not without their own difficulties. Lord Ashworth, confronted with proof of his own dealings with a murderer and usurper, found his standing in Fenmore Crossing badly shaken once word spread of exactly what he had known and chosen to ignore. He did not lose his lands, but he lost the easy trust of a town that had once simply assumed a lord's word was worth trusting. And he lost, too, the services of a gamekeeper who no longer needed his coin quite so badly, since the newly stabilized clan at Blackridge, grateful for a warlord restored to honest leadership, offered Arthur steady work as the camp's own farrier, and more than that, as something like a bridge between two peoples who had spent 5 uneasy years barely tolerating each other's existence across a treaty line. The town itself did not change its heart overnight. There were still men at the tavern who spat when Yash walked through the market square at Arthur's side, still whispers behind cupped hands, still a wariness that would take longer than a season to wear fully smooth. But there were others too, slowly, who saw the way Barak Ironveen's clan kept faith with the new peace, who saw the way Yash Doomhammer, of all people, chose to spend her strength defending a small human settlement's borders from wolves and worse rather than raiding it, and something in Fenmore Crossing began, grudgingly, to shift. Arthur built them a home at the edge of the forest he still walked as gamekeeper, close enough to the treaty line that Yash could ride to Blackridge in half a morning when clan business called for her counsel, close enough to town that Arthur's old duties still found him when Lord Ashworth's ledgers demanded it. It was not a grand house. It was sturdy stone and good timber, with a forge Arthur built himself out back, and a wide bed they had both had a hand in building, and a hearth that never quite seemed cold no matter the season. Almost a year to the day after that first frantic night by the servant's door, Arthur stood in the yard outside that home, working a stubborn nail into a new gate-post, and looked up to see Yash Doomhammer riding home along the forest road on Scarn's broad back, her leathers still the same dark, well-worn rust color she had worn the very first day he met her, a brace of rabbits slung over the saddle from a hunt she had clearly enjoyed more than the errand required. "You look pleased with yourself," Arthur said, setting down his hammer as she swung down from the saddle. "Barak has agreed to open the eastern trade path to Fenmore Crossing's grain wagons," Yash said, catching him by the collar of his shirt and pulling him into a kiss that tasted of cold morning air and quiet triumph. "Peace, Arthur Monroe. Real peace, not paper and promises. My father would be proud." "I think he'd be prouder of his daughter," Arthur said, and meant it. She laughed, low and warm, resting her forehead against his the way she had that very first night in the crumbling watchtower, when the whole world had been hunting them and neither of them had cared, because they had already found the only thing worth keeping. "A year ago I slipped through a servant's door to save my own life," Yash said quietly, amber eyes bright in the fading afternoon light. "I did not know then I was running toward the rest of it." "Good thing you ran the right direction," Arthur said. "Good thing," she agreed and pulled him close, and neither one of them, not for one single moment, ever wished they had chosen differently.